I'm Glenda Crossling, Head of the Centre for Higher Education Research at Sunway University in Malaysia, and in collaboration with Oriental Hearts and Minds Study Institute, we are delighted today to present the webinar 21st Century Changes and Challenges in Learning and Design of Pedagogy in Higher Education. It's with great pleasure that we welcome participants from across the globe. We have people participating from the ASEAN region, from Asia, from South America, from African countries, from the Middle East, from East European countries, from the UK, Australia, US, India, and Sri Lanka. So we welcome you all, and we hope that you find this seminar or this webinar useful for your purposes. So in essence, our webinar is about change in and for the 21st century. And nothing could be more convincing than COVID-19 that change and adaptation are integral to our 21st century world and hence to higher education. As we all know, with COVID, universities worldwide, shaken to the core, have experienced massive change with online learning, dramatically changed campuses and interruptions to the flow of talent of students and academics across the world. Indeed, we've all had to be innovative and draw on our critical and creative thinking to cope. While we need to remember that universities have always been changing since their inception centuries ago, COVID has certainly heightened and accelerated changes. Some of the more recent changes that are still impacting today are that since World War II globally, there have been high rates of student participation in higher education. Moving away from the traditional students or the more elite students, we now see much wider participation with efforts for equity and access for underrepresented groups forefronted. We've had internationalisation with students' academic programs and academics crossing national boundaries, and this has led to very diverse student and academic cohorts. Alongside this has been accountability and imperatives for educational quality, and we see this in global university ranking systems. But we must not forget that, or we cannot forget actually, that over the top of this is the massive technological development of automation, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, Industrial Revolution 4, and so on. And as Klaus Schwab says, society is at the crossroads, and Bjorn Hobson and McAfee see it as the coming together of computer power, data collection, and human cognition that is enhanced through university education. And all of these changes, along with the issues of sustainability of the planet, all of this leads to new issues that require new ways of doing things. So more practically, what does this mean for higher education and student learning and pedagogy? Marginson writes that higher education has a key role in societal development. It prepares students so that they can contribute to this world of adaptation and change through minds that are flexible, critical, and creative to address current and not yet known problems. And all of this is on top of their or using their disciplinary knowledge. Indeed, Alatas in Malaysia wrote previously about the need to move away from what he called the captive mind. Cross-national and multidisciplinary approaches to solve problems are required. So, how is this being done in higher education? To cite some examples here, internationalisation and student and academic mobility contributes to opening minds, bringing different perspectives to campuses and classrooms, broadening minds and worldviews. And there is research being undertaken into these issues. For instance, in our centre at Sunway University, with two British Council funded projects led by Professor Graham Atherton, we've investigated internationalisation and student mobility in the ASEAN region. And for many years, my experience of working and living in Malaysia has been that through transnational education, Malaysia has reached out internationally. And our study, in fact, published last year, found that Malaysia is poised post-COVID for increased ASEAN student mobility. In 2019 and 20, 50% of mobile students from the ASEAN region came to Malaysia, those that were moving intra-ASEAN. And it seems that post-COVID, the region could become even more, Malaysia could become even more popular within the region for student mobility. Another issue that arises from the internationalisation and the increase of the number of students attending higher education is the student diversity, which leads to new understandings of disciplines and its topics, and also of how students learn. And in our centre, a study we've undertaken on international student has looked at the way that international students learn and how some of their strategies that they employ can be used to broaden the learning experience for all students. Our centre studies, in conjunction with Singapore colleagues, have looked at online learning in the COVID period. And we found that, yes, students were largely happy with their online learning and in fact quite grateful for the opportunity to continue learning digitally. But we found that what they wanted was increased teacher and student interaction and communication, that they didn't just want the lectures transferred to them in digital form, that they wanted this experience of discussing and working together and sharing ideas with their teachers and students. Our associate member in the centre, Professor Graham Wilkinson, has written about the need for the workforce, for graduates in the workforce, and their need and the need for them to be persistent and resilient, because work is changing and that it's more contract-based and requiring graduates to bid for jobs rather than expecting a job to be available at the end of their studies. Professor Mahendran Nair, Shanta Vitalinga and myself from Sunway University, and again, Centre Associates, we have investigated the nature of creative thinking. And we published our article in the journal Studies in Higher Education. And we found that educational quality goes hand in hand with creative thinking. And what this means is that what is required in the higher education setting is active, applied learning, links and collaboration with centres of excellence nationally and internationally. These are key to the broadening, the opening of the minds and making the space for new ideas to emerge. A current project that we're doing is looking at the future of higher education, and we're drawing together chapters by various authors across the ASEAN region to look at their perspectives on the future of higher education. So we have an exciting theme in our webinar today, and we have a smorgasbord of speakers. And I'll now pass over to Dr. KJ John, who will moderate the session. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. And I think you gave a really big overall scoop of the issues. And I would maybe summarize it in two big words. One, there are a lot of changes going on. Changes in technology, changes in cultural interpretation of learning, meaning how I hear what I'm hearing and the interactive nature of that. And thirdly, the media and the speed at which all this is happening. And the disenfranchisement of why some people feel this over others. For instance, in urban areas like PJ, we get good connectivity, but as we experience it, YB Barubian just now, He's up in the boondocks in Sarawak, and because of that, the connectivity was slower, and bandwidth may have been equally narrower. So these are challenges that we are facing. One guy who is sort of riding high above all these challenges is going to be our next speaker. He's the keynote speaker, but before I introduce him, let me just throw some ideas for us to think about. And I have a simple favorite way I speak about this. When I was a 12-year-old boy, my mother told me, son, the world is made up of blacks and whites. Just know what is black and what is white. If you understand the whites, you'll know everything else is black. Okay, and she focused on teaching me what not to do and what to do. It became the language of black and white for me. But when I went off to college at the Royal Military College in Sungabisi, I realized that mom didn't tell me the whole story. Okay, because in between blacks and whites was the gray areas. And then I had to learn about the gray areas all from other boys. Stuff my mother never taught me. It may have been a gender difference, I don't know, but she didn't teach me some issues related to the boy gangs and the boy fighting and the blue corner boxing and the red corner boxing. So I began to understand there's blacks, there's whites, and there are grays in between. Then I went off by the grace of God to do my MBA and then later my doctorate at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And I came across a professor, 3 professors who touched me sincerely and taught me that it's not just blacks and whites and grays, but there are the colors of the rainbow out there. Go and explore the colors of the rainbow and don't reduce yourself to black, whites and grays because you miss out on enjoying the colors of the rainbow. Therefore, folks, that's where I come from as a philosophical underpinning. I've captured it all in my dignity thesis, in my doctoral dissertation, and it's published and available through whatever forms. I think you can buy it online from the people who keep records of this. But it taught me that we first and foremost need to respect the other. There are more than 162 others on the screen with us here. They're all going to be punching in their Q's questions and asking us questions. We'll try and answer all of them, but not all can be answered, so we'll aggregate some of them and try and answer at a higher level. And yet there are those who are too quiet to be even asking questions, or they are learning in the initial stages of learning about black and white and grays. So they will be shy to ask questions, but we'll let them be, because we are not forcing anybody to ask any questions, but enjoy the discussion. And if you still have questions at the end of this 2-hour session, please feel free to write in the questions, and at least I will endeavor, if the question is directed to any particular person, I will endeavor to bring them along to answer the questions for you. That's just an attempt to bridge the communication so that we do bridge the gap. And one other thing I want to say is that while we try to cover everything, we will not cover everything. I will try at the end of Dr. Azli's presentation to summarize what he's saying, but I know at the level he flies, I call it the 50,000 feet level, there are few planes that fly at that level. But he's one of those. He's a Malayan who's moved to and lives in New York right now, but he's a culturalist, he's an author, he's a writer. If you go and join him on LinkedIn, you will see he's a prolific writer, speaker, and author. So with that, allow me to invite Dr. Azli in to do his introduction and presentation, and after he finishes, I will throw 1 or 2 questions before we invite all the other respondents in to speak on the sequential order that they were addressed in the brochure. And one last comment before I write off. There was a lady, Rinalia Abdurrahim, who happens to be a student of Dr. Azli at Kuantan Science School, who was supposed to join us, but she took ill about a week ago and had to pull out because health didn't permit her to come on board. So I want to declare publicly, it's not that I'm not sensitive to gender issues, it's just that our keynote speaker, who is a Princeton and Harvard graduate, could not come in at the last minute because of ill. And anyway, she sent me a text yesterday through LinkedIn to say she sends a greeting to everybody and hopes the next time around she'll keep her date with me. With that, thank you very much. Let me hand over to Dr. Azli. Come in, Dr. Azli.
Okay, thank you, my friend, Dr. John. Well, I'm not going to fly high. I'm going to go down the ground and walk like a chicken. So maybe that will help understand. But first of all, thank you very much for Sunway, and also I'm very fortunate to have to be with people with experts and also colleagues who are into education and also the future of what education is going to be about, right? I will start with, we have 10 minutes. By the end of this presentation, we're going to have, I'm going to have questions for us to think about, right? With any presentation that I give, I don't have the answer, right? But I have more questions than answer. And maybe this is a way for us to explore. But in talking about it's a very conceptual and challenging topic, like such as the interplay of technology and cognition for liberal education. The key point is this: if I can summarize, first before I begin, is like, what are the skills that we need to conceptualize things and to analyze, and also to make changes, and also to create new artifacts as cultural beings, as a consequence of the rapid development of technology, and how do we prepare our brain and also the people that we're educating for these changes that we don't know what it's all about, right? The philosopher Lao Tzu once said that the only permanent thing is change, and as soon as human beings carve the stone, then the beginning thus begins the what we call the act of destruction, right? So this is the whole idea. Let me pull something first, right? 1 second. Okay, apologize because there is what we call thunderstorm and in this area, and I have to always be prepared for the possibilities of the machine is not working. All right, so we're good now. Now, in talking about this, I always begin with talking about, in order to perhaps Einstein once said that in order to solve a problem, you cannot be solving the problem from the same plane that the problem arose. So that's the problem that we have now. We sometimes fail to look at things philosophically. Philosophy is the mother of knowledge, and when we talk about technology, for example, right, it's a very complex phenomena of human evolution. And when we talk about technology and changes that's happening as it relates to liberal education, we begin with to talk about what is the philosophy of technology. Can we move this the next slide, please? Right. All right, thank you. Right, we need to consider any changes that's happening, mega changes, mega structural changes, mega trends in society must begin about technology. Must begin the questions on philosophy of technology and the culture of technology, which is anthropology, and also the politics of technology. Technology is not neutral. It's owned by forces outside, and it's been created as artifacts, and those who control the artifacts of learning will be able to control the direction of technology. All right, next set of notes, please, right? And technology, as we know, is an evolving system of meaning, because culture is also meaning. Technology has culture, and it relates to the process of industrialization and cultural evolution. I wrote my dissertation on the interplay between technology and culture, and look at the evolution of the creation of the multimedia super corridor the creation of the city of Cyberjaya. And these two elements of technology and culture is very strongly related. And I look at what is the future of this society. That was about 15 years ago, right? And when we look at technology, we look at evolutionary markers and literacy, meaning that now today we talk about being in the industry 4.0. What does that mean? Post-industrial revolution, post-humanism, everything that is post to be attached to it. And yet we look at evolution of technology, not from industrial revolution itself, in fact, but from the beginning of civilization itself, from Sumeria and the Egyptians and also the early Chinese civilization. So everything has agency and elements and creations, and also it changes the way we become literate. Right? All right, next please. And technology, if for those in literature will understand this whole idea of Frankenstein, right? Was written by Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft, and it talk about the dangers of creating something that we don't have control over the centuries. No, in future we don't we cannot see where this technology is going, but we know that it is changing at the rapid, as if it has a life force. And this is what's happening in the age of AI, smart machines, and the age of 3D printing and space exploration, as if we don't have any control, but we know that things are moving, and it changes the way we do things in society. Right? They'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, last one for the slide, the last point. So knowing the understanding the whole idea that technology changes, and sometimes we don't have any control. Sometimes we think that we have control, but we misunderstood the word progress with something that is other than progress that involves technology. Then the question is that Malaysia and the technological experience, are we experiencing an ongoing insurmountable challenges? Just look at the experience of the multimedia super corridor, and also the digital communication revolution that we had in the 1990s, early 1990s. Where is it going? Are we continue to be dependent on technology from outside? Are we continue to be grappling or struggling with where is our workforce ready? Is our generation of children in schools ready to be in this what we call Industry 4.0? All right, next please. All right, as it relates to intelligence and artificial intelligence, so these are the things that we need to consider, right? What is intelligence? And the cognitive psychology is the ability to understand the nature of intelligence from a psychological perspective, and how do we educate the complex brain in this age of rapid technological changes? Okay, next please. All right. I've always thought that the whole idea of today, Industry 4.0 can be summarized into this whole idea of singularity and multiplicity principle, meaning that we look at things as very complex changes, but then again we try to bring it together, and we start losing it. We try to bring it together, and this is what the age of fragmentation is about. We are fragmented. Our consciousness is fragmented, but we try to make everything whole again. And I always, and before I start lecturing and teaching my classes, I will always start the first week with complex chaos theory and complex system, the butterfly effect of things. And it is more relevant now when we talk about, the development of technology from 1900s, the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, those two happened in Britain, and the third industrial revolution in the United States, the invention of the computer, and now with the age of smart machines and Industry 4.0. How do we look at all these changes and analyze it from a system of so complex that we talk about you had to use a different theory, like complex theory. And any invention of the artificial intelligence will have implications, right? Social relations of production, meaning that factories are going to be changed. The nature of factories is going to change. People are going to be needing the skills. And what are the skills going to be used for? It's going to be used for this new industry. And how are we going to prepare children? Again, this is a question of education today. Is our education from K to 12 to postgraduate education ready for us to be living in this future, yet the future is now? So that's a question, right? All right, my last slide is this, right? All right, so what does it have to do with liberal education? Okay, now that's not it's a very interesting word, Talibanism in the age of AI. Now, sometimes I have to throw some words because it's interesting how to look at contradictions, right? Okay, let's move on to the next three sets, right? In order to think, to create, to come up with new ideas, to think, with intensity in diversity, and to look at the challenges ahead, we have to liberate our mind, and through education, through freedom in thinking, freedom to create new things, and to be, entrepreneuring and enterprising and pioneering thinkers. We can't stop. We can live in a world in which thinking is not allowed. And that's what I put in the words, right? Talibanism and totalitarianism, right? Which will limit, which will close the mind of any people in any society, right? And also the Covidism and historical challenge of development of nations. Now, this is a black swan phenomena that we have, almost exactly 100 years after the Spanish flu of 1918, right? Similar implications, similar challenges, but in a different time, a different century. Now, this creates tremendous amount of rupture. These create not only rupture, but also disruption. In the United States, 60% of the jobs that were created in 2008 already gone, right? So now it's emerging new, and the industries that benefit from this are industries that relies on high-speed internet access and technology, right? Amazon, Walmart, those that has mastered the communication technologies are the ones that has flourished manyfold, right? And that's what we need. We need all the more now education system that is progressive and is according to, based on the American system education philosophy is called Deweyan. John Dewey talk about the ability for people to think, to teach them how to think and not what to think. So this, I think, could be the antidote in order for us to prepare our next generation to address the challenges. All right, I think we have a few more. This last slide. And I had a chance over the 3 summers to teach the joint teaching with a university in Mexico, and most of we focus on talking about the work culture in the age of information technology. And the projects the students did was to analyze the future of work based on the disruptions that's happening today. So I think this is what we need to look at, right? The mega structural changes. And also, how do we look at, how do we harness of cognitive psychology for human survival? And lastly, the last set of notes, the whole idea of futurism. And how do we take futurism as an idea and pull it apart and turn that into an agenda for education so that we can teach our next generation of, the importance of looking at data, big data, analyzing and moving forward rather than be stuck in the past. No, although I teach world history, right? I teach world history, sociology of the future, and cultural perspective, but I see history only as data for people to move forward rather than be able to live in the past and entirely and also endlessly, right? So we're using the data and also to come up with ideas and also to programs for our next generation to think about the future and to not just to imagine, but using data to build scenarios and to look at things like, skills like future wheels, and to look at where technology is going so that we will not be lost in the quote unquote the future. Second last, Generation C is what we call Generation COVID. Today we are educating. Hybridity, is it entirely hybrid education? Is it entirely virtual, entirely remote, or is it entirely uncertain that we are experiencing and also we're trying to implement? And lastly, finally, right? Relevant to what we're doing here in this webinar is how do educators, whether you're educating children from the kindergarten or whether you're educating people who have finished their doctorate and ones with a postdoctorate degree, how do we design? What's going to be the pedagogical or educational design that that would be coming out of this? One is the rapid advancements of technology, and number two, the era of disruption due to COVID. So I invite all of us to think about all these things. These are very broad ideas that touches on the philosophical, anthropological, and political aspect of technology and the importance of liberal thinking education, so that we don't get into, and the next generation will not be confused and be homeless, jobless, and clueless. Thank you. Right.
Thank you, Azli. Wow, you did a great job to summarize all that in such a short time. Thank you very much. I think Azli used some big ideas and big words, and we'll try and dig deeper. Three big interactions I see. One is change and constancy are being interfaced double all the time. So social media, for instance, is in making us and forcing us to interact with the rest of the world in ways we never thought was possible or even imaginable. But we are forced with that. On the one hand, you're watching CNN and understanding what the Talibanism is. On the other hand, the questioning of Talibanism is also happening on social media. So this is one aspect. The other is the idea of technology itself. The word techni and logos means the how-to of studying about the how-to of techni, the techniques of doing things. How do you dig below these techniques and understand them? The third is the big idea of cognition. We are on the learning end, so we cognate and we understand issues, but is our understanding the same as the other person's understanding? And the final issue, although Azli didn't directly address, is on his paper, the title of what do we mean by liberal education? But I think he summarized it in the form of agency. We are all agents of the choices we make. We have a choice to either blindly comply under the rubric of saya yang menurut perintah, or I who follow orders, or we make choices. I come to a fork, I choose to go right, I can go left. That's agency, and you make the choice. You are the agent who makes that choice. The next idea that Azli flashed on his technology and culture was the idea that the idea of change itself is changing. If you thought the word change meant something, that word itself is changing in its meaning. So it's real-time change. Change itself is changing real time. In that predicament, the challenge for any individual as a respondent to all of this is, do I lose control? Am I losing control of the world? How do I maintain control? And where do you find that control? Is it in the external? COVID reminded us that the external cannot be trusted when change is changing, because you don't know which next door neighbor has COVID infection and will infect you. And you don't know what stage of your infection would be and how you would survive the infection. So this was the third set of ideas. And finally, he tried to pull it all together in cognition and AI. Okay, the world of technology is bringing all of this together, and I love a professor, Peter Senge. He didn't teach me, but he was a well-schooled scholar in this field of change and leadership. And he described the world today very accurately when he said we are in the messy world of reality. It's a truly messy world. We cannot be comfortable in any one category of ideas. It's a messy world, and unless you get your finger into the mud and feel the mud and sliminess of the messiness, we won't be able to comprehend and make sense. So making meaning and sense is getting involved. If you stay uninvolved, then we stay out. So with that, let me ask Azli some questions. First question, is there an alternative to closed loop learning, and how do we change ourselves to open loop learning? especially from this idea of an impact of both Covidism and, if I may use your term, Talibanism?
It's a very good question. We have to increase our effort to to introduce liberal arts education. Here, I mean, I didn't elaborate, but liberal education is such a misunderstood word. It simply means to master the arts and sciences that has been created existing in this modern world. Because it is true, for example, through strengthening our understandings of the arts and sciences, for example, that and doing challenging ourselves to advance knowledge in these fields, even at the level of secondary education, that we're able to grasp the bigger picture and understand what's happening in the world of AI now, which is even experts here trying to understand what it's all about. So our background in liberal learning is weak, so we lost that part of humanism in our education system, because liberal education, humanities are fundamental as a balancing act for this highly technological world that will, according to Stephen Hawking, the greatest danger of humanity is the AI. It's not environmental climate change. So I hope that answers. So we have to enforce the teaching, not enforce, but also really cultivate the love for liberal arts and humanities.
Thank you, Asli. Thank you. Okay, now my second question to you is, now I bring myself down to the level of the individual, any of the individual listeners in this audience today. The question to you is, how do I first, I mean, I'm above 60, so this question is framed within the logic of a 71-year-old. Number one, first, how do I unlearn? I may have learned last 70 years all the bad habits, or even the language of black and white and grays, but don't know the language of rainbow colors. How do I unlearn that? Number two, once I can unlearn that, which is habitual, how do I begin to learn anew? Okay, learning anew requires unlearning also, concurrently, because the technology is today changing faster than I can keep up with technology. Every so often I have to call my neighbor, a good friend of the family, and say, hey, Rupinder, come and help me figure this technology out, because he's about 20 years younger than I am, or 30 years younger, and he's able to deal with the technology a little better than I can. So this question, how do we learn, unlearn, and relearn within the context of all the listeners who are maybe 50 years younger than both of us? Thank you.
Okay, it's a very good question. Number one, you're still young because the lifespan now is 100 years old. So number two, to answer the question is that it's never too late to learn anything, right? Number one, how do you unlearn things? Of course, it's by number one is to reading, to discussing, but the principle of diversity of opinions that we allow to consume and also to appreciate points of view, because knowledge, of course, knowledge explodes, and this explosion of knowledge is so tremendous that we can get, and to choose what is it that we want to know that is practical to us, without trying to understand that we want to be the Renaissance man or woman and try to know everything. And the choice of readings that we make is also part of what we live for example, right? So this is whole idea that that to be able to, I'm fortunate, for example, to be engaging with younger students who has new ideas, new perspective. So I get into their lives, whether they are undergraduate, whether they are graduate students, to get into their lives and has them perspective. In the end, they become my teachers. Why? Because they are the ones who are living in this present, and we are the one who is going to be, keeping up to date with all the things that's happening. So again, knowledge comes from different perspectives. One is from philosophical, from religious, from cultural perspective, and also from scientific perspective. So we aware all these things, then we know where knowledge is from, comes from, and we can make choices. What do we want to know? And what do we think that we don't have the time to learn, but we are drowned, so that we are not drowned in information and stuff for knowledge, let alone come with, be able to understand with wisdom the things that we know. Hopefully that to learn anything. That's,
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Azli. Now, the stage of the webinar, we'll switch to the other speakers. We have 4 other speakers. I'll invite each of them. They each have 10 minutes. And the first, I'll go in the sequence that we advertise them, except for the lady who couldn't join us. The first speaker is Professor Graham Wilkinson, who is currently the Vice Chancellor of Sunway University. He's been in Malaysia since 2012, but has been Vice Chancellor in 3 other universities before, experience at different levels. And he will join us, and may I introduce him and give him the floor for the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and let me just try and share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, well, good morning. What I'd like to do in the next 10 minutes is share some of my own reflections on the major changes in society in this century and the implications of those for our higher education pedagogy. And if I could perhaps just begin by making a simple observation that in my view, pedagogy in universities has really changed very little in the past 50 years. You know, it's getting on nearly 50 years since I first stepped foot into a university lecture theatre. And the way I was taught all that time ago is really very similar to the way we teach students these days. So I don't see much change in pedagogy, the way we're actually approaching the whole issue of higher education. But what I do see is huge changes in society, and I think society is changing much faster than higher education. So I'd make that simple point, that I think we have not really evolved higher education to match the changes in society. And if we just go on to look briefly at what I think are the main changes in society taking place at the moment, things I think really should concern us as universities and concern us in teaching our students. First of all, of course, everyone is becoming very concerned about issues of global concern, such as sustainability, the existential threats to humankind, such as climate change, pandemics, geopolitical instability, and so on. And of course, the way that automation, robotics, AI is impacting on the jobs market and employment. And it's been predicted around 50% of current jobs will disappear within 20 years. That's something's been going on for a long time and will continue to go on. Then, of course, is the growth of the so-called gig economy, where work is being packaged up and distributed in small bites rather than people having solid jobs. I don't just mean people becoming Uber or Grab drivers, but people doing professional jobs, finding their work being fragmented and then having to bid for it, you know, through some online platform maybe. And of course, the result of all of that is growing inequality, with the people who own the platforms that provide this kind of thing becoming much wealthier, and everyone else really losing solid employment and losing income. And at the same time, we've also got this growth in technology such as AI, and there are real issues here, because I've just heard this term recently, which I think is a very interesting one, extractive planetary computation, whereby all of the major data companies, whether we're talking about Google or Apple or Microsoft, Amazon, they are literally hoovering up our data. They're using it, they're doing clever things with it, well, clever things that actually pose significant risk to us, because they're actually matching us against standard patterns of behavior and so on. And this can impact on our ability to get finance, to do things, to access all kinds of services. And there are big issues around all of this. And if you want to know more about that kind of thing, I strongly recommend this book. I'm going to recommend some books in this talk. This one, a very interesting book published just this year, very recently, by Yale University Press, on the Atlas of AI, which just shows how the world's being connected by these global data companies and the uses and abuses of all of that data. And it is really quite sobering and quite scary reading. I do recommend this book. But moving on from that, there are also obviously exciting opportunities from new technologies, which indeed we need to prepare our students for. And these opportunities come through things like recombinant innovation, which is where different technologies are put together to create new opportunities. I give the example of, for example, Google Maps allows you to plan your journey from A to B and avoid traffic jams because they put together digital mapping, global positioning, 4G, 5G technology, smartphones. All of those technologies are put together to create a new piece of software that gives you the chance to do something quite interesting, which is plan a journey and avoid traffic jams. So it's very useful. But of course, that brings together different technologies. And so we need to train our graduates to be able to do that kind of thing, see the connections between technologies to create new opportunities. Likewise, we also see many opportunities from multidisciplinary knowledge. And indeed, you know, I grew up in the UK education system based primarily on single field honours degrees. And indeed, in Malaysia, we have essentially the same thing. But I think this model is no longer quite so relevant. We need knowledge that comes from different fields. And, you know, I trained initially as a physicist, and I'm quite interested in how physics is being used in other fields now. For example, how physics and computer science are coming together in quantum computing, which would give us entirely new, much more powerful computers, and also how quantum theory is being used to analyze economic issues as well. And again, two books of very great interest there I recommend on these topics. But what is the impact of all of this on individuals? First of all, I think what we can say is that I think it's becoming quite clear that, you know, career ladders are disappearing. People will have fragmented careers. You will no longer enter a company, move up the chain of, you know, of the ranks of an organization. That will no longer be the case. So people will need re-education, retraining several times over during their lifetimes. Their income levels will be more volatile because of that. And also they may have much more fragmented work. So uncertainty will become normal. People may even have more downtime or leisure time. How will they use that? We need to prepare them for that. And also we need to reevaluate what is success in life. And success may no longer be simply climbing a career ladder, but it's actually how you organize your life and use your time. And people need to become, I think, less anxious about that and find a new way of thinking, which helps them be calmer and accepting of the uncertainty that exists. And again, promoting some more books. This book is a very interesting one, also recently published, 4,000 weeks, which is about, you know, a typical lifetime is about 4,000 weeks if you live to around 80 years old. And again, you know, this is about, you know, what do we want to do with our lives and how can we come to some new kind of frame of mind in this current kind of quite anxious kind of world we're getting into to actually, you know, enjoy our lives, make the most of them. So I recommend this book as well. So what does all this really mean for pedagogy in higher education? It seems to me that we need to be thinking now about not only, you know, how we teach, but also what we teach. And we certainly need to be teaching deep knowledge, because deep knowledge at the frontiers of subjects is very important in terms of progress. But we also must have cross-disciplinary knowledge and what I call recombinant thinking, following some of the models I've been talking about. I very much think the liberal arts model in the US is a very good example of how actually things do work quite well. And we need more of that kind of approach. We need to go further than that. We also need to, you know, impart resilience and coping strategies in our students. It's no longer, you know, they have to accept that the world is going to be very different. We have to accept it's very different from the way it was when we were younger. And so we need to be able to educate students on how to be resilient, how to cope with an uncertain world, how to manage their finances, to be stable in this difficult, uncertain world, and also how to manage their information footprints and the risks that come from that, you know, because AI data is gathering everything they do online. How is that going to be used? Will it be used for good or bad? I mean, I know many personal examples of how data is being used in a bad way. I don't have time to go into it here, but you know, there are many issues with the way AI and big data are being used these days to control people in ways perhaps we don't even realize. And then I think we have to help our students and graduates to understand their lifetime priorities, optimize their leisure time, and also become good citizens. So there's a huge range of issues here, all related to changes in society and business and employment. And somehow we've got to adapt our pedagogy to deal with all of this. So it's no longer just you go into a lecture room, get taught one subject in a deep way, and that's the end of it. There's much more to be done now in terms of appreciation of multiple disciplines, multiple subjects, how to cope in this highly uncertain world, how to cope when work is no longer solid or guaranteed throughout life. How do you run your life in this kind of world? How do you avoid the anxiety that may come from that? And so we've got to give the kind of education that copes with all these kinds of things. So, I mean, again, I'm not giving answers. I'm only really proposing challenges and questions. I think that is perhaps a theme that I suspect will emerge from today's seminar. But really, that's what I think is as the key challenges we have ahead of us. And I will just summarize this up in a sense in one very quick slide, which says, I think future pedagogy must be holistic. I think it must be fit for lifelong learning, which I think is a phrase we've used a lot in the last decade or so. But it must also support our lifestyle learning and our life purpose learning, because really life is changing so fast, society is changing so fast. We've got to adapt our higher education to deal with these kinds of issues too, because we take young people into our institutions. We need to prepare them well for the world they're going out into. And it is more than just teaching them one subject now. It's teaching a lot of things and preparing them well for this highly complex, uncertain world they're going into. So I'm really pleading for some really serious rethinking of pedagogy. And obviously I welcome further discussion and debate on these issues, and look forward to hearing from the other speakers as well on some of these interesting topics. So thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting and informative for you, and I'll be delighted to take questions on this later on. So that's it for me for now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Graham. Next on the sequence of speakers is Professor Dr. Tajuddin Madrasti. First, I must say he's a very good friend, very personal good friend, family friend. And secondly, he's a professor of architecture. And he thinks, along one of my professors, he thinks disthoughts and unthoughts, not just thoughts. So he challenges existing paradigms by asking questions of relevance. So with that, can I invite Dr. Tajuddin to lead us on for the next 10 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. John is my go-to person for any questions on constitutions and history of the country. So today I'm going to be just reflecting on the topic of what I call university and global spirituality, something which I have mentioned a few times in my writings. And I would like to just summarize or make a statement that our university education is basically producing graduates and academics more as a tool for industry rather than a blessing to mankind. I thought that 15 years of education, we should be able to produce both aspects of someone becoming a tool for industry, but most importantly also a kind of a blessing to mankind, or if you would like, tool for mankind. Now, when I interviewed 25 valedictorians from my university, and I asked them two questions. One, what book have you read other than your discipline that has changed your life? And the second question that I asked is, what have you learned, one thing that you learned from another culture or faith other than yours? Now, to both questions, none of the valedictorian candidates gave an answer. neither do they read any books, nor do they reflect on the meaning from other cultures. In the promotion exercise, I asked would-be associate professors 2 questions. What book have you read that would educate you into another discipline? For instance, I read about the writings of Michio Kaku on the development of science. I read also on aspects of religion or Islam by Mustafa Akyol and many other authors to give a different perspective of Islam that I never learned. I also read books by Alvin Toffler about technology and other things. And to this, the lecturers do not have an answer. And then I would ask, if you were to write a book about your own field of mechanical engineering or electronics engineering, what would be your message to the society? Again, no one gave any answer. Now, outside of the university, we had once a group of Gabungan Mahasiswa Islam students threatening the May 13 onto the Dongjia Zong group for organizing a Congress on Jawi issue. Then we had a student from Sabah who stood up and gave the Nazi salute and wrote in his Facebook, he agreed that all Jews should be killed, women, children, all that. Then we have also the infamous Congress Marwah Melayu, organized by public universities, attended by a single race group of academics, shouting, trying to defend only one race against all others. So what has happened to all those years of education? We can see here a rise of self-centered political and economic conflicts, apathy of environmental sustainability and poverty. All these are aspects which requires the human intervention, requiring compassion, requiring an alternative view of history. These are not actually taken up by the graduates because basically the academics themselves are bereft of the elements of how to deconstruct and reconstruct narratives of history, narratives of politics, of human economics or environmental aspects, and also religious understanding. So we have a situation where, and I agree with the first commentator just now, that we need a multidisciplinary approach. And Buckminster Fuller has said that one of the tragedies of modern education is specialization, making somebody an architect, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer from day one. And so this is what they have turned out. They have become tools for industry and purposes of function and utility, but they have not become a human being. Now, some people say, well, that's the job of religion. Sorry, religion is a problem in this world because it concentrates on identity religion, not a global spirituality. And so what I was looking at actually is a formula where we can look at a 60%, 20%, and 20%, where 60% could be the so-called trade specialization, 20% should be something of multidisciplinary. And I'm thinking that this is also for academics, like doing a master's or doing a PhD. You need to have that, rather than just studying research methodology of that specific field. And you also have something of what I call philosophy, spirituality, discourses, and activities. And the 20% of philosophy, spirituality can also be engagement rather than classes. Engagement with certain groups of NGOs, certain a religious institution, that opens up the vista of inquiry rather than just on one specific area. I would also like to think that if we can have 3 industrial practices or internship, one would be for the trade or to the specialization, like say engineering or architecture, but one should be with the political agency like the Wakil Rakyat or the members of parliament, and the other could also be with an NGO. And so here we have a situation of the university not just preparing a kind of a factory for producing a lot of trade situation, but also becoming a force of social change. And I have always said that the university is the first test of true nation. If students cannot come together, despite their race or religious aspects, then we have a failed nation. If academics don't know how to teach students in a more larger perspective, then we also have a failed nation. So I was thinking that aspects of curriculum education should be also not on lecture-based, but also on engagement-based. And thesis as well as dissertations can also be part and parcel of an action aspect rather than simply a data statistical collection that really has not much meaning. I am looking at more immersive aspect, meaning that they would be immersed in certain, say, a part of the member of parliament or part of an NGO or part of like they are immersed in the industry. And this will then create a more rounded personality that comes out of a university. If not, all we have is a situation where graduates are only tools for industry and of course for them to make their living, and then we complain and say this politician is wrong, this political party is wrong, that history is wrong, everything is wrong. But the thing that is wrong are the parents who don't really care about the development of their children, as well as the academics who only delivers what they are asked to deliver in terms of that aspect. So I think that in the future, graduates, undergraduates, and I agree with the first speaker just now, that there should be more multidisciplinary, but I add on an aspect of philosophy, spiritual engagement, rather than just classes. Credits will be calculated based on certain immersive aspects of that nature. And finally, on the academic who's doing masters and PhD, you're not just taking research methodology on their area, but they are also having to take some other multidisciplinary subject in order for them to have a wider appreciation and more of an innovative idea and thought that would actually be more beneficial to the society. I think this aspect, I would like to conclude by saying that going to the university is a very sacred aspect of a human's life. In Islam, knowledge or ilm is a sacred responsibility. Those with ilm will be questioned first in the hereafter. And so in order for us to have this idea of a person that will help navigate not only technology, but more importantly, human relations. Now, if you put technology on somebody that does not have the ability to navigate human relation, then you're creating a weapon of destruction. And so this is an aspect which I think the soul searching of all universities and also the qualification agencies and also the ministries of higher education, that the university is larger than simply a whole table of statistics of who gets what jobs, when, how, and what, and earns so much. The cost of that kind of perspective, we can see now in relation to our politics and our, not only the politics, but also the general society that wants to isolate themselves from each other based on race, religion, and other lifestyles and cultures. So I think universities should be the third force of change, other than the politics, as well as the agencies of civil servants. But the university needs to be the third force of change in the nation. If not, we are driverless, heading to nowhere. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we go back to the exit the slides, please? Okay, thank you. My task now is to welcome and introduce Dr. Johan Arifin Samad. Dr. Johan is a scholar in his own right, a Sabahan primarily, and I came to know him in the first time in that context as a Sabahan. As you can see, Kota Kinabalu is very proudly behind him in the picture, and he is now leading an NGO, if I call it NGO, called Sabar. Sabar as in patience, the Malay word sabar, which means patience. So he is a very strong advocate and activist and has a large following in Sabah. So let me welcome on behalf of 2 states that have celebrated Merdeka, Selamat Merdeka Sabah and Selamat Merdeka Malaya. Welcome, Dr. Johan Samad. Thank you.
Thank you, KJ John. And thank you most of all for inviting me from East Malaysia to present my short 10 minutes. I'll share my slides. Can you put the slides on, please?
Yep, I'll do that shortly.
Okay. The picture in the background is Mount Kinabalu, for all those people who don't know. And I'm based in Sabah, North Borneo. And we are located on the island of Borneo, including Ben Baru, who's going to speak on the next topic. So I just use my slide as a talking point, and I like to say that we should keep pedagogy very simple from my perspective. I specialize in soft system methodology, so I'm always looking at from the soft system perspective as opposed to the hard systems, which we've been talking about, especially from Dr. Azli's side. And I think there's a danger to overuse many technical jargon talking about pedagogy, and I think we need to come down to well, as KJ pointed out, we're all at different levels. Maybe my level is probably more related to the drone level, flying around 200 feet and below, and more related to connecting to the people on the ground. So as I mentioned, I come from Sabah, the state, unfortunately, with the highest poverty rate in Malaysia, because we are in Malaysia and talking mostly in the context of Malaysia, although I know we have a global audience, but the fact remains in my state, after 58 years in Malaysia, and Malaysia is a very young country, people think we have a long history, but if you talk about Malaysia in the right context, it's only 58 years. And the situation remains the same in most of the rural areas in Sabah. The challenge of physical distance, difficulty in finding teachers to relocate, and poor internet connections, and poverty is still prevalent in Sabah. So how do we teach in rural areas where the basic amenities are absent and where the poor infrastructure has hindered the development of education? And the situation has created a divide across the South China Sea. If you understand the map of Malaysia, Peninsula Malaya and Sabah and Sarawak in Borneo are divided by the South China Sea. And the flight time is about 2.5 hours. It's 4,000 over kilometers distance between the 2 states. And there's a class divide, of course, between the urban and rural areas. And I was the former deputy director of Sabah Foundation, where we used to give scholarships, loans to students. And I remember every year we used to choose the best students in Sabah to score, 9 A's, 12 A's, and so on, and to be schooled in Peninsular Malaysia. Why is that we're still sending at this age, that in time, that we are sending students to Peninsular Malaysia? Because basically the school system or the facilities are better than what we have here in Sabah, and that's why we send them. But of course, there are other purposes also in cultural exchange and stimulation of understanding between the two entities. So unfortunately, some of them married, or fortunately married Malayans and so on, and we lose the good students. Like Singapore has taken away all our good students also. Next slide, please. So we're talking basically about COVID era education, and you heard about a famous story of a Sabahan girl who has to climb a tree to access internet connection to sit for exams. She became very famous person in name, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia and the former Prime Minister of Malaysia and so on, and ministers love to take pictures of her to highlight the situation, but it is very much political, but its solution is still not there. All right, so if you're talking about teaching in today's context, how do we reach out to this situation? Although we have made advancement in technology in all areas, as Professor Asli mentioned earlier, how do we go back to the basics to educate those people who are left behind in our system of education? So the pandemic has created a new situation as well as opportunities, and the philosophy of education should be simpler. I think it should be kept simple and leave no one behind, and access to all to level the playing field. It's easier said than done, of course. I mean, given the geographical location, the technological advancement and disparity between connections in the whole of Malaysia. Well, I mean, new technologies like Elon Musk of Tesla, who uses enormous wealth to bring Starlink, high-speed internet access for people in rural areas. Those are the kind of things of technology we can tap into, but I don't know how much studies has been done in this area to connect to things like Starlink and so on. But it's something that, as I said, there's an opportunity here, despite the situation, COVID and so on. How do we attach ourselves to new technology and new facilities to bring teaching to the rural areas? Next slide, please. I think Professor Tajuddin has covered most of the things related to the Malaysian education system. As we know, it's heavily politicized till today, and one race and religion dominates, and that's sad, because Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysia consists of 50 different ethnic groupings and races, but we never look at it as diversity and find strength in our diversity, but we try to assimilate everybody into one race and one religion kind of thinking and philosophy, which I find quite disturbing for East Malaysian especially. And there's funding leaks across teaching and distribution channels. We all know about that. We can see corruption every day. I mean, for example, the case about solar panels, 250 millions or billions have been channeled to elsewhere, and this could help rural areas connect without electricity and so on. But corruption is rampant, and all these things are channeled into different pockets. and which is quite a sad thing to talk about. And then there's a skewed national history and narratives. Most people in the Peninsula will probably talk about the Malacca Sultanate and so on. But we also have a rich history of the Sulu Sultanate in Sabah and Sarawak, with Raja Brooke, a white Raja who ruled the state and so on. So I think one of the things that we always need to understand that we all come from different history, different cultural background, although we are in one country called Malaysia, right? But the narrative should not be just one race and one religion, which is the Malay race and the Islam as a religion, because a lot of Christians also in Sabah and Sarawak, and that we need to look into. And Malaysia definitely does not reward the best brains. Okay, we unfortunately priority also given to one major race, the Malays, and you left out the Indians and Chinese, who are also equally competent in getting the what do you call the right grades to enter university or elsewhere, but they're never given a chance to enter these universities, except for private universities. But I'm talking about public university, government universities, where there's restrictions for other races to join. So that's very sad, because then you have this brain drain, and then people leaving Malaysia to have the best education in overseas, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, America. I mean, those are the traditional places where we send our students to be educated. So that's all I want to say for this morning. I believe that we need to look at the soft system methodology side of it, not just the hard systems. And I hope we have a good discussion and seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johan Arifin Saman. Oops. Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Johan Arifin Saman. And now we move on to the final speaker, last but not least. In fact, he's the only YB or Yang Berhormat in our company today. And if Johan agrees with me, he's probably the one on the ground who is hearing the worst and the best complaints. I don't think he gets compliments, but he hears at least the worst and the most terrible complaints about what's wrong with society and politics and life and philosophy and everything, all worded in simple questions of simple people on the ground. So let me welcome YB Barubian. He's both an adun at the state level and a member of parliament in Sarawak. And I've had the privilege of knowing him since, I think, the launch of OMSI. And so, welcome YB Baru. The floor is yours. You have next 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, KJ John, and thank you, Sunway, for inviting me to respond to the issues raised by the main speaker, Dr. Azli, and the other respondees, covering or rather proposing some interesting approaches and forms of teaching methods for the future in higher education in Malaysia. I'm aware that discussion on this issue had been advanced probably decades ago as we move into the 21st century. So this meeting, this discussion, I believe is timely. And I must declare my interest here. I'm not an expert in this field that we are discussing today, but I'll just share a little bit from my observation and my experiences, is what Dr. John said, from observing and listening from the ground. I'm quite interested and quite attracted to the issue of culture in education. or multiculturalism or multi-ethnicism in this whole discourse. Now, as a country, Malaysia is known to reflect diverse cultures due to our diverse ethnic groups. And Sarawak and Sabah, in fact, even more evidence in this regard. For Sarawak, we have more than 10 different ethnic groups speaking more than 20 different dialects with their unique cultures. And now with the additional of foreign students coming into our universities, makes our higher education institution more culturally colorful, as mentioned by our host in her opening address earlier on. Therefore, naturally, our educational institutions should reflect this diverse cultural makeup. This will, of course, present some social inequalities. The classroom becomes the arena that could marginalize such students and some of the students. And many of the students experience cultural, economic, and language barriers that prevent them from operating fully within the system. And I speak as a native of Sarawak. Culturally, the natives are very docile and unassertive. And as such, they may not be able to participate fully in the classroom discussion, resulting in withdrawal attitude and consequential failure. The teacher's attitude may also contribute to whether such students succeed or fail. Now, with of course with the incoming of many foreign students into our universities, I think we should take note of these people as well. Therefore, understanding and appreciating their backgrounds and cultures is crucial to determine success or failure. And I recall in my, although talking about higher education, I recall in my Form 5 years back then, where 3 of my friends were chosen to be in the science stream. Well, then science stream was deemed to be more challenging. If chosen into that stream, you are a better student. But unfortunately, they were good students, and I felt that they should have passed the senior Cambridge, but unfortunately they failed the senior Cambridge. Basically, they felt that they were left out by teachers and therefore couldn't keep up with the rest. Now, some example too from primary school. I'm talking about primary school now, and I believe this can be applicable to higher education as well. Top achievers in primary school, in rural primary school, when they were selected to special school in the cities, they fail to perform. And I believe what are the reason? I think one of this could be again the cultural background, or perhaps the inferiority complex that they have. So these issues have to be addressed. So it has been said that most of the graduates of typical teacher education program know little about cultural traits, behaviors, values, and attitudes different ethnic minority groups bring to the classroom, and how they affect the ways these students act and react to institutional situations. So these teachers do not know how to understand and use the school behaviors of these students, which differ from their normative expectation as aids to teaching. Therefore, they tend to misinterpret them as deviant and treat them punitively. So it's important, I believe, that teachers' training programs should include multicultural approach to education in our country. I think we took, we took our diverse cultural background for granted. So therefore, I would agree that cultural pluralism is an important factor in the makeup of educational system. And schools and educators play an important role in shaping social behavior and must make an active role in celebrating diversity. And the whole education system must be assessed and monitored often to see if multicultural provision are followed. And teachers' sensitivity to culturally diverse learning style helps motivate students to succeed. Now, the second point that I like to comment on is the technological issue, the industrialization 4.0 and AI that have been raised earlier on by the speaker. And I do agree that we are living in the midst of a tremendous upheaval in the fields of technology and communication. And I agree that technology can promote student engagement immerse students in real-world issues, enhance discussion and workshop, and facilitate formative assessment even from our homes, more so in the midst of this COVID-19 situation. Now, students today are often digital natives who are very familiar with technology. However, there is a profound digital divide between students who have access to technology and students mostly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who don't have the same amount of access. Now, that's the challenge that we have. The new technological advances can be helpful, but there are some associated problems. For example, students may spend too much time using the devices. The internet includes information that may be harmful as well as helpful, and teachers may become overly focused on technology to the detriment of information transfer. Now, how do we handle this? I think this is a challenge. Be that as it may, the practical problem for Sarawak is coverage. And I mentioned this earlier on to Dr. John. 4G coverage in Sarawak is around 54.2% only. In the rural areas, it is as low as 10.1%. Example, Bukit Mabong. In Kuching, it is 90.8%. Therefore, this basic infrastructure must first be in place, even before we talk of the introduction of technology into the classroom. So even if there is connectivity, many families can afford to provide each child with a device. And I'm talking about in the context of COVID-19, in many families, the children take turns on their parents' mobile phones, even if there is connectivity. To be more effective, I believe we should introduce all these new methods in the lower structure of our education system. Although we talk about the higher education, I would think that we should come into the lower structure, the primary school, the kindergarten. And I'm glad that Dr. Azli mentioned that in passing earlier on. Now, I just want to make this statement that I absolutely agree with the progressive existentialist philosophy of education, being open-minded and reflective, teacher creating a learning environment where both teachers and students are free to reflect, ask questions, and engage in philosophical dialogue about issues and more choices in life, student-centered, and the holistic development of the whole child, emotionally, physically, socially, and intellectually, as some of the progressive existentialist philosophy. Now, I say this because this had been proven in one of the, although this is primary school, SK Baklalan, in my own state constituency. Now, SK Baklalan in 2000, in fact, it was about the beginning of 2000, was chosen by the education department as an experiment school. And what happened was they were given some special attention, special allocation in terms of cash to provide facilities and create a more conducive environment for studies. And what happened? In fact, they bagged the most promising school in 2003, Excellent School Award in 2007, Cluster School of Excellence in 2007, International Commonwealth Education Good Practice Award in 2007. Now, what happened was I spoke to the headmasters, I spoke to the teachers involved. With all the cash that they had, knowing the context of Sarawak, with a lot of, we don't have enough good facilities in primary school, but they got all this cash and they bought their materials, the facilities, and they even created a botanical or scientific garden around the school. And they bought telescope to observe birds and study the birds, and they get some instruments to go into the rivers and examine the rivers and all those kind of things. And they were very involved in this in Indian studies, and they were given the freedom to do all this. So I believe all this had given them that impetus and encouragement that they performed so well a few years in around this time that they became the top achievers in the final exam and beating all the town schools. So I believe in order to enter higher education institution, students need to have a good and solid foundation in kindergarten, primary school, and secondary school. But unfortunately, from a Sarawak perspective, discourse about the various forms of teaching methods in higher education pale in comparison to the need to address other major challenges facing rural schools and students, just like our Sabahan speakers shared earlier. And these are poverty, dilapidated school. In Sarawak, we have 1,400 schools, expected 3 billion cost to repair them, and lack of teachers, poor facilities, and schooling environment not conducive to learning. So here we are talking about the pedagogy in education as we face the 21st century, but in Sarawak and Sabah, we're still faced with the 20th century problems and how to overcome them in our educational system. That's all I can share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, YB. Maru, appreciate it. But first, now I want to address all those who are listening in. We're supposed to have 162 different people listening in on Zoom. May I request, if you have any questions, please table your questions now so that on the chat, just write your question, type your questions in on the chat, and we'll see if we can find time to answer them. So while I wait for those questions to come in, I want to suggest two ideas. One is, first I will table the question that's been asked, and I would like Dr. Azli to start, and other panelists are free to comment on it, because I'm not sure it only refers to Dr. Azli's comment, but it relates to some of the other comments made by other panel speakers as well. So the question is this: what support or changes are needed to change the pedagogy from teacher transmission dominance or teacher-centered learning towards student-centered learning, especially in a work online environment? The work online environment is not conducive for just purely a student-centered learning, especially in places where they don't have other adults support to ask questions and interact with. Can I throw the question, and all panel members are free to give in their 2 cents worth. Thank you. Dr. Azli, you want to unmute and try? Yeah.
Yes. The two very short response here. Number one, from a top-down perspective of change, the leadership, the highest leadership of education, whatever, the minister has to be an educational philosopher, pedagogist, and must have experience in the classroom, ground up, and also equipped with all the understanding of human intelligence and how to develop that for nation building. That's from the top down. From the grassroots, we need to educate teachers. How many of the universities really have, for example, education courses that talks about multicultural education and strategies of innovative teaching? The philosopher Nietzsche once said that if you want to educate the teachers first. These are the frontline intelligent workers that will have the trickle down and also the multiplier effect of millions of children. And this is not happening, I think. That's why for 60 years, why are we still not moving to that next level of innovation, nation of innovators and creative users of technology? So that's basically it too.
Thank you. Any of the others want to make a comment?
Yes, I'd like to reinforce what Dr. Azli has said. And I think we should start at the university level. Something must be done with regards to the the construct of our academics. Now, one of the things that has changed nowadays is that all academics have to attend this class on teaching methodology. In the past, we don't have to, but now they created this postgraduate diploma in teaching, which is it is good because it exposes for the first time to the idea of teaching, because lecturers come from two aspects. One, from the industry, don't know how to teach. Two, they come from research-based activities. Again, they don't know how to teach. Took me about 10 years to grapple with how to teach and all that. So something needs to be done in terms of whether it is some sort of a course or something like a KPI of reading other books, multidisciplinary and all that, and promotion exercise, and also research, where research of multidisciplinary aspect is more encouraged rather than a single discipline. And that only will trickle down to the students, who will then go out with children and also being a teacher and all that. I think I agree with Hazli that the teachers and at the university level, we should start at that.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to comment? YB Baru?
Yes, John, I think I would believe that, yeah, you start at universities, you start at the level where future educationists be trained and go through this proposal, this new methods, and emphasize to the fact that the confidence to be given to students to be able to solve problems, be able to deal with the problems, you know. So it has to be a policy starting from up there, and the teachers would be able to implement this and give that liberty for students to explore.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me throw a question to all three of you. I want to make a distinction between the word pedagogy and andragogy. Children learn differently than adults. My greatest disappointment is I think we're still using too much pedagogy in the field of higher education. What do I mean? See, adults learn differently than children. Children, if you say this is A, they understand this is A. It's filling a blank plate, and you teach them ABC, they learn ABC. But with adults, anybody above 18 years old, they have learned a lot of things, not just education in the formal sense, but bad education, good education, bad habits, everything they have learned. They come into the classroom now as a 18-year-old or a 19-year-old in a higher education institution. Isn't our first challenge to unlearn some of those quote-unquote bad habits? This, I find that we don't give enough attention to adult education, meaning to educate an 18-year-old. We have no time to go and do basics all over again, but how do we help them unlearn? So there is a more dynamic adult learning environment that's created in training institutions. And when I was in Intan, we spent a lot of time doing this with adults, because we had teachers are adults and students are big adults, you know, because they're all civil servants who have been appointed into public service. So this is just a question that's always in my mind. Any comments? Anybody wants to go ahead? We only have about 1 minute left.
Yes, when my first year student comes into my class, I would tell them that the university is a place of questions. It is not a place for answers. Answers to an academic is a response to a certain situation at a certain time within a certain framework. So in the university, it is a place of question. So that is the point where when I think Azli mentioned about forums, giving alternate narratives of history, alternate perspective of religion. But then universities have this self-censorship, as well as the idea of being frightened of giving an alternate view, not only at public universities, but also at private universities. And this, if continues, will not give this idea of alternate education and independence of mind, thinking, and sourcing knowledge.
Okay, Dr. John.
Okay.
Yes, quick.
Just quick one, yeah. As I've said earlier on, I think this whole new approach must be introduced in the lower structure of education.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there will be a shocking, it's a shock to them in the university. That's why this whole culture must begin in the primary school and it's carried into secondary school, then into university. Then the student will be more confident of their capability of responding.
Dr. Azli, last
quickly.
word, 30
Yes,
seconds.
KJ,
yes,
can
last
I?
word.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second. Last word, very, very briefly. Why don't you say the current, the modern way of what we call the backward design? You start with your curriculum standards. What do you want to teach? And what are the questions that you want to raise? And what are the concepts and skill? And how do you assess what we have taught? What students should know? And it doesn't have, it's no difference between teaching a 4-year-old and a 40-year-old if you follow the sequence of the design, but it has teaching is a deliberate context of teaching rather than just spontaneous and this. So it's a whole big picture and also small picture right down to the neural connections of the child that we want to educate. So that's, I think, is the key.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. We have to move on to the next part, which is the final part of our session. Can I invite Glenda to come back on the screen and do the finishing touches? She will do 10 minutes and then Professor Graham will do the final 10 minutes. Passing the slides, I'm passing the floor over or the Zoom over to Glenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, KJ John, and thank you very much to the speakers. What an array of perspective and what a rich smorgasbord we have been the privilege to listen to today. It's been fantastic. I've had actually a very tough job, I must say, in gathering together all the thoughts, and maybe at another time I can look for more overriding themes. It might be a bit fragmented today, so I hope that you will accept my apology for that. But I think that such a rich array of views on 20th century higher education in learning and teaching has been presented. And an important factor is that they're from different perspectives and different settings. We've had the views of East Malaysia and more international views and more Malaysian views presented on this topic that we're looking at. But what we can possibly glean across the top of these presentations, and I'm sorry, but interpretations often are subjective, so maybe other people will have different interpretations. But for me, the point that came out across the top of the presentations was the need for open-mindedness, for flexibility in thinking, and what underpins these is the capacities of critical thinking and creative thinking. And we just had some discussion previously of critical thinking. Often people think of critical thinking as saying negative things, and it can be off-putting. But actually what we mean by critical thinking is the ability to look at several perspectives or a couple of perspectives and to be able to evaluate them, to weigh them up. And it may arise that there is a negative opinion that comes out of them, but it is not just saying negative things, it's more balanced than that. And perhaps that's something that we need to emphasise. And of course, we need to have critical thinking in order to see advantages, disadvantages, pros, cons, etc., of a range of issues and topics and settings in order to be able to arrive at something new, which is the creative thinking. So for me, that's what comes out of it. And also what comes out of it is the issue of equity and access that COVID-19 has exacerbated, that it's not just in Malaysia. And I understand very much, what our speakers have spoken about, but it is a global issue, that it has drawn out the differences between, what can we say, the haves and the have-nots, not only in terms of infrastructure, but in computers. And we've had images on television in Australia of some families where there's one kitchen table with 4 children and a mother and a father doing their work, and there might be 1 or 2 computers, and the computers may not be, all that strong to handle everything that needs to be done with it. And I imagine that in other situations there are much more difficult challenges in terms of the infrastructure. But let me just run through some of the presentations. Dr. John, I felt that you started beautifully with the comment on respect for others, that all have perspectives to offer. And these can all be drawn on to arrive at solutions. And these are most likely better solutions than just arise from one perspective. You also spoke about the importance of agency, the ability to make choices across the range of perspectives. And this comes back to the notion of the critical thinking in terms of evaluation and weighing up that we spoke about before. Dr. Asley, wow, what can I say? Such a rich presentation, and I'm certainly going to listen to it again. It was a deep and broad perspective on knowledge and life in the 21st century, looking at from the philosophical, technical and the cognitive perspective. We looked at Covidism and Talibanism. And I guess what you also spoke about Frankensteinism, the danger of something we don't have control over, the changes and how do we manage these. Bornhofsen and McAfee spoke about the power of human cognition to actually draw on the big data and the computer power that we have. And I guess this is something that we need to grapple with. You know, how do the humans keep the power over this? And I think that that's something that Schwab has written about. You spoke then about the importance of, in this situation of complex systems and complex cognition, the need for liberated minds. That from your perspective, this was talking about the freedom to think different things. And out of this arises the opportunity to be entrepreneurial. Let me just see what else I have here in my notes. You spoke about the teaching for the next generation, the data, the big data, and the looking forward, and to building scenarios so that humans are not lost in them. And then you spoke about the COVID generation and the need for the future of work, mega structural changes, cognitive psychology, and futurism. You, in response to the question from Dr. John about how do we unlearn, how do we learn, how do we relearn, it's never too late to learn and appreciate different points of views. It doesn't mean that one has to adopt the different points of views, but it means that, you know, trying to, as you pointed out, to look at them from their own perspective and what is it practical for us to do within this. So thank you very much for that presentation. Moving on to Professor Graham Wilkinson, his reflections were of the changes in society and the implications for technology and pedagogy in universities. And his view perhaps would be supported by many people. That, you know, we've been talking for a long time about constructivism and the need for sharing of views, for discussions, for developing perspective arising from interaction with other people and also in other settings. But, you know, how much has this been advanced in higher education? It's difficult to know. And within COVID, as we found from our research at the Centre for Higher Education Research, that online learning in many cases has just reverted back to the teacher talk, but placed online. How do we build in this capacity for interrelation and discussion meaningfully and students working together to solve issues? How do we deal that with online learning? Professor Wilkinson also spoke about the inequality that is arising because of automation and in terms of the platform owners and the job seekers, the gig economy, that the notion of a secure employment and a secure income may be not existing as we move forward with the big data. And also the tech companies, how they are hoovering up, and I guess by that we mean vacuuming, the big data and the knowledge that they have on people and their lives and the impact on our lives and services are other issues. But Professor Wilkinson also spoke about the opportunities to prepare students, drawing on the notion of recombinant technology, to put together different areas of knowledge, different technologies, multidisciplinary views, and to help students to be able to learn in this way, so that we've got deep knowledge, cross-disciplinary knowledge, resilience, and so on as we go forward with the world of the future. In terms of Dr. Muhammad, the university and global spirituality, the expression of graduates being a tool for university rather than a tool for mankind was most evocative and probably rang a chord with many of us. Human intervention is required in the dealing with technology in terms of compassion and alternative views of history, the ability to construct and reconstruct narratives of history, and the multidisciplinary approach. The tragedy of the specialisation of modern education compared with looking at from the human being's perspective, and the suggestion for students to have 60% disciplinary knowledge, 20% multidisciplinary and 20% spirituality, and also for academics to have this was an alluring concept indeed. The notion of internships with specialisation, political organisations and NGOs. So it's engagement-based education, active-based, action-based and immersive-based. Our next speaker was Dr. Johan from Sabahan, and he spoke again about the soft system of technology compared with only the hard aspect of it. That there are challenges with the distance and the rural-urban divide in education, and most obviously these were apparent in COVID with the infrastructure and the access to the computer technology and the wonderful story of the student having to get up the tree to do the exam. In the COVID era education, how do we improve the situation? How do we educate those left behind? This is an issue globally. Many countries are grappling with this, but many countries and internationally, the notion of access and equity for underrepresented groups is being grappled with and has been grappled with for decades actually, and there are some solutions on hand. You know, we know that those who are first in their family to attend higher education, if English is their second language in an English program, if they're rural and isolated students or they're disabled students, women in non-traditional disciplines, these are areas that students do require support. And there are movements in higher education now that recognise the difficulty of the transition exacerbated for students from non-traditional backgrounds, such as through emphasis on the first year experience and different ways of supporting students. But yes, it is an issue, and arising from this, it needs to be challenged, it needs to be investigated, especially in terms of the COVID changes. Dr. Edwin, you again spoke about teaching methods for the future, and as you said, it was a timely discussion. You spoke about the culture, the multicultural perspective, the multi-ethnic perspective, and, you know, just imposing a culture and a perspective on a person or a group of people can be even more alienating for them than not having them have access to it. And my interpretation of your discussion was that you were calling for understanding of different cultures and different perspectives, because we do have diverse students in our higher education and in our education systems. So rather than just simply imposing and dismissing what may have been a legitimate, or what was a legitimate cultural background for students from diverse backgrounds, looking at and understanding on it and drawing on it and building it into the education program so that it improves the education for all students. So thank you very much to all of the speakers. I hope that I haven't taken too long, but I'll pass back to KJ John. Thank you.
And the final Thank you. Thank you, Glenda. The final part, we only have about 5 minutes left, but can I invite Professor Graham to come and do his closing address? Professor Graham, are you there?
I am indeed. Thank you, colleagues. And we have a few minutes left, and obviously I'm keen for us to make sure we finish on time. So thank you very much. My name is Graham Allerton, and I'm an associate professor at the Centre for Higher Education Research at CHER-Sunway University, and I'm based here in the UK. So it's still very early over here in the United Kingdom. But I guess I'd like to just firstly echo Glenda's comments about the broad nature of today's event. I think it was really good to hear some more philosophical positions with regards to higher education pedagogy and the future of higher education, really, as well as, of course, some more grounded perspectives from the front line, if you like, on some of the challenges faced in terms of particularly accessing higher education in different parts of the world by different communities. I guess the idea really is to look forward now and see where we go from today's seminar. And I think certainly for the centre, we are involved in a range of different potential research projects. I think multidisciplinarity is crucially important, and I'd really invite everybody who is on the call today, and on the session, if you do have ideas regarding research work that can combine and blend together different perspectives coming from today's event, please be in touch with us. I mean, it's such a wonderful session today, but really it's where we go forward to make a difference that really matters. So please contact us if you can. I'm going to really just, in my 3 minutes, look at 3 particular questions that came out for me today in terms of research. Firstly, I mean, Glenda picked up on the point of who higher education is for. My role particularly, my work is particularly focused on equity and access in higher education, both in the UK and across the world, through an initiative called World Access to Higher Education Day, which is happening on 17th of November this year. But I think really in terms of where we are now, and the pandemic as well, we should really be thinking about whether disruptions caused by the pandemic can lead us to reimagine higher education in terms of who it's for, and to reform some of the structures which have got in the way really of enabling higher education to be available for all. We focus a lot, I guess, on the impact of the pandemic on those who can't access HE, but can we reimagine where higher education is going forward? Recently looking only this morning at California, where they've had a higher education equity task force. They've been looking at whether we can build a more equitable higher education system. That's something we all could think about going forward. What also came for me today is, can we also reimagine, what success means in higher education? That was a really strong theme for me coming through this morning. Can we think in research terms of what success really means? We know that employability and economic impacts are so important, particularly in areas of the world where jobs and employment are perhaps less available than in others. Yet we've also thought about that being couched in a broader terms, in terms of what success means. So how do we assess higher education success? What do we think about? Does this mean that when we think pedagogically wise, we're talking about what if success means different things? Should we assess students in different and more creative ways? And again, what we've all been through, this unified global experience of the last year or so, can it provide us a platform to think differently about these issues? And finally, therefore, of course, what is higher education for? Here's an opportunity to think more broadly about this question, particularly in the sense of higher education not perhaps being the only way in which people can develop and learn as communities and individuals going forth. It's location within society, as to preserve of the way in which people really learn and take things forward in an intellectual and perhaps spiritual way. Is this higher education the only route? Should we be looking at ourselves in HE and reviewing ourselves, reflecting on our own particular positions, our own particular roles, to consider whether this role of higher education is a crucial one? We all agree that through the call, but it has to constantly revised and reviewed if it remains relevant for a changing world. What does research mean for that in higher education space? Pedagogical research often pops, if I venture to say, might be seen as a little bit dry, possibly. But I think possibly it's not. I think what today unveiled to us, higher education pedagogy research is not a dry issue, concerned necessarily just with detail regarding assessment of feedback, etc., etc. It sits in a much broader philosophical set of questions about the whole purpose of higher education. Who accesses it, why, what success means within it. If you're interested in taking any of these questions forward in any form, please be in touch with us. Please think about, if not in touch with us, please think yourselves about how you can work with colleagues in these areas. We're always there to work with you. But we're only one area, I guess, in some way in CHER for research collaboration. Perhaps coming out of this, do you think yourselves about what colleagues are there? Are there those in your own institution you've not thought about working with before? Who possibly could be colleagues for you to take this work forward? It's now 1 minute past the end. I'm keen not for us not to go any further. I thank you again for coming onto the call. I thank all colleagues and the collaborative work that's gone on here. Particularly, we'd like to thank CT within our team. Without CT's work in terms of organising and putting together the administration of this event, it would never have happened. So really a great shout out to her for all the work she's put in today. And I'll hand over perhaps to Professor John just to close us for today's event.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all who participated in one shape or form. I don't need to name because we're all on screen, and I just want to record my final thanks for the privilege that Sunway extended to me to help moderate this and collaborate with OMSI to launch this. OMSI is an NGO. We're not into any formal systems. We just have a Sindrian Berhad which is registered, and we try and be responsible and accountable to everybody. Thank you very much, and I'd like to end here because a commitment of time is always a commitment of discipline. Bye-bye. Thank you all. God bless until next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jane.